In a small house in the Boston suburbs, Carol Watson silenced her alarm for the third time. It was 5 a.m, with 2 hours before her shift at the hospital began. She roughly pulled her long blonde hair into a ponytail and walked toward the sounds already coming from the next room. "Jason, are you up already? Take your medicine and make your bed before breakfast is ready, okay?" When she opened the door to her 9-year-old son's room, Jason was already playing with toy trains spread across the floor. His school uniform was carelessly tossed on the bed. "Mom, look. I designed a new route map. I'm going to present it for my school project." Jason's eyes sparkled with excitement. His ADHD caused problems with hyperactivity and concentration, but it also gave him remarkable creativity and passion. Carol smiled and gently stroked her son's hair. "That's wonderful. But we're in a hurry this morning. Did you take your medicine?" "I did. But I don't want to wear the uniform. The collar itches." Carol sighed. This was their daily ritual. She calmly encouraged her son to get dressed, then headed to the kitchen. 9 years as a single mother had taught her patience. Everything had fallen on her shoulders since her ex-husband David left right after Jason's 3rd birthday. While preparing breakfast, Carol's eyes fell on an envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. An elegant cream-colored invitation. It was a wedding invitation from her sister Lizzie. She picked it up and read it again. "Elizabeth Watson and Brian Martin cordially invite you to their wedding ceremony and reception." At the bottom, seemingly added as an afterthought, were the names Carol Watson and Jason Watson. The ink color was slightly different. It was obviously added later. Carol felt a subtle pang, but wasn't surprised. Her relationship with her sister had grown cold over the years. They had been like best friends as children. But everything changed 10 years ago when their parents decided to pass the family accounting firm to Lizzie. "She's more stable," was their parents' reasoning. A nurse's salary couldn't be considered stable for a single mother.
Do you know some people earn over $10,000 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop. I do it 2 link below if you're curious.
Since then, Lizzie had continued climbing the ladder of success. Watson Accounting, founded by their father John and mother Martha, had expanded under Lizzie's leadership and gained a reputation among the local wealthy. And 8 months ago, she got engaged to Brian, the only son of prominent real estate developer Richard Martin, who worked in his family's investment company. The perfect couple, reported the local society column. Carol returned the invitation to the table and took a sip of coffee. "Mom, what's wrong? You look sad." Jason had entered the kitchen. He was wearing his uniform, but one shirt button was skipped, and his tie wasn't knotted. Carol forced a smile and fixed his shirt. "It's nothing. Just an invitation to your aunt's wedding." "Aunt Lizzie? She doesn't like me, does she?" Carol was momentarily speechless at her child's sharp perception. "That's not true. Aunt Lizzie is just busy. Do we have to go?" Carol pondered. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to feel out of place among Lizzie's wealthy friends, being treated as her poor sister. And especially not bringing Jason, who might be seen as the problem child. But she took a deep breath. "Yes, we'll go. We're family." The phone rang. It was the hospital, asking if she could come in early due to a staff shortage. She agreed and quickly prepared Jason's lunchbox. "Mrs. Clark will pick you up after school today. Mom will be home late." She kissed Jason's cheek and walked him to the school bus stop. She waved until the bus was out of sight, then got into her old sedan. On the dashboard lay the response card for Lizzie's wedding invitation. Carol took a pen and checked, "Will attend with pleasure." Whatever awaited her, she wanted to preserve the family bond. And somewhere deep inside, she hoped to someday repair her relationship with her sister. She took a deep breath and drove off to work. In the glittering grand hall of Mount Auburn Hotel, Carol tried to relax her shoulders. The invitation to the rehearsal dinner had come suddenly by phone, just a week before the wedding. "Brian's father wants everyone to attend," Lizzie had said. It wasn't hard to detect the implied message: "We didn't really want to invite you." "Mom, this suit is uncomfortable," Jason complained. Buying a new suit had been financially challenging, but Carol had managed to find one on sale. It was a bit large, but she had convinced him that, "You'll grow into it." "Just a little longer," Carol said while fixing her son's hair. "Grandpa and Grandma will be there too. They must be looking forward to seeing us." That was half a lie. Her parents had expressed disappointment in Carol and Jason with both words and attitudes whenever they met. Especially her father John, who had dismissed his grandson's ADHD diagnosis as just spoiling him. At the entrance to the hall, a waiter was checking the seating chart. Carol Watson and Jason Watson. The waiter looked down at the list, looked again, and appeared confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your names." Carol's stomach sank. Surely her sister wouldn't go that far. "Is there a problem?" A cheerful voice came from behind them. Turning around, Carol saw Lizzie standing there in a beautiful emerald green dress. Her fiancé Brian stood beside her. He was tall, handsome, and confident. Like a movie star. "Our names don't seem to be on the list," Carol said quietly. Lizzie laughed lightly. "Oh, sorry. I forgot. Brian, could you have them add seats for these people?" Brian said something to the waiter, and the problem seemed to be resolved. Carol and Jason were escorted to a small table at the edge of the room. It had clearly been added as an afterthought and was the furthest from the main table. The worst possible seats, Carol told herself. Lizzie must have done this deliberately. "Be patient," she smiled at her son. "We can leave after dinner." At the main table, her parents were chatting amicably with the Martin family. Martha and John Watson were successful accountants, a solid couple. They had always valued stability and appearances. When Carol decided to become a nurse, they called it a poor choice. When she became a single mother, they said she had ruined her life. Dinner was served, and Carol watched as Jason ate quietly. He was doing well. His medication was working, and the new behavioral therapy seemed to be helping. "You must be Carol." Startled by the sudden voice, Carol looked up. Richard, Brian's father, was standing in front of her table. He was a man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore an expensive suit, but his expression held an unexpected kindness. "Yes, I am." Carol stood and shook his hand. "I've heard you're Lizzie's sister. A nurse, is that right?" "Yes, in the emergency department at Memorial Hospital." "Wonderful work," Richard smiled warmly. "My late wife was the same. She had a passion for emergency medicine." "Oh," Carol was surprised. "I didn't think Brian talked much about his mother." A shadow passed briefly over Richard's face. Brian had a complicated relationship with her. But that's another story. He turned to Jason. "And this must be the famous Jason." Jason, though a bit nervous, politely extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Martin." "What a wonderful young man," Richard said, clearly impressed. "What grade are you in?" "Fourth grade," Jason said proudly. "I won an award for my train project." "Really? I'd love to hear about that." "Dad." Lizzie's voice interrupted their conversation. She hurried over. "Everyone's looking for you. It's time for the speeches." Richard looked slightly confused but nodded politely. "We'll talk more later," he said to Carol before leaving. Lizzie gave Carol a cold look. "What did you say to Richard?" "Nothing. He approached us." Lizzie pursed her lips in disapproval. "You always try to get attention." "That's unfair, Lizzie," Carol responded. "We were just sitting here." Anyway, Lizzie changed the subject. "Is Jason all right? He's not going to cause any problems, is he?" Carol suppressed her anger. "Jason is perfect. He's a wonderful child." "Well, if you say so," Lizzie said skeptically. "But at tomorrow's wedding, I hope his, condition won't be an issue." Carol looked at Jason. He was listening to the conversation but trying to focus on his meal. "Jason will be fine," Carol said calmly. "Don't worry." Lizzie shrugged. "Well, Dad and Mom are worried about how difficult your situation must be." She emphasized the word situation with irony. Being a single mother, raising a special child. No wonder his father left. A frozen silence fell over the table. Jason's fork clinked against his plate. Carol took her son's hand. "You," Carol's voice was low and trembling, "have gone too far." Lizzie showed a moment of guilt, but it quickly vanished. "I'm just stating facts." She turned on her heel and returned to the main table. Carol took a deep breath. "She's wrong, Mom," Jason said in a small voice. "I'm not special. I'm just me." Carol's heart ached. She placed her hand on her son's cheek. "You are special, Jason. But not in the way your aunt means. You're a wonderful, smart, caring boy." She looked around. No one was paying attention to them. The morning of the wedding day was, ironically, a perfect sunny day. Carol was zipping up her dress, gazing at the sunlight streaming through the window. After last night's rehearsal dinner, she had spent the entire night wondering if she should attend. But she couldn't bring herself to sever family ties. "How do I look?" she asked Jason, who was lounging on the bed. Her navy blue dress was one she had bought 3 years ago for a friend's wedding. The back zipper was tight, but she couldn't afford a new dress. "You look beautiful, Mom," Jason answered honestly. He was also wearing his new suit. The collar was a bit too large, but the black tie gave him a mature appearance. "Since today is a special day, can you promise me something?" Carol knelt in front of her son. "If anything difficult happens, remember to take deep breaths and remember your medication." Jason nodded with a serious expression. "I know, Mom. I'll be good today. I promise." Carol's chest hurt. A 9-year-old child shouldn't have to promise to be good. He hadn't done anything wrong. "You're a wonderful boy," she kissed her son's cheek. "Now, let's go." Arriving at the historic church in Boston's suburbs, many guests had already gathered. At the reception desk, women in glamorous dresses were checking the seating chart. Carol held Jason's hand and joined the line. "Carol Watson," she gave her name to the woman at the desk. The woman looked down at the list and frowned. "Ah, yes. Ms. Watson and your child." She emphasized the word child with a particular expression. "You are over here." Their assigned seats were near the back of the church, in an almost invisible location. Carol suppressed her emotions and quietly led her son to the designated seats. They were quite far from the main seating area, partially hidden behind a pillar. "I can't see anything from here," Jason complained. "It's okay," Carol said gently. "The real fun is the reception after the ceremony." That was a lie. She sensed the reception would be an even tougher ordeal. The ceremony was magnificent. Lizzie was the perfect bride, her pure white dress making her look like an angel. Carol watched her sister from afar, feeling complex emotions fill her chest. A sister who was once her best friend. Sisters who shared secrets and dreams as children. When had they become so estranged? After the ceremony, guests headed to Mount Auburn Hotel's Grand Hall in limousines. Carol and Jason followed in their own car. "I'm hungry," Jason said. "Can I have cake?" "Of course," Carol smiled. "But dinner first." The hotel's grand hall was beautifully decorated. Crystal chandeliers shone from the ceiling, and the tables were adorned with white and gold decorations. Again, there was a reception desk, and Carol gave her name. This woman was more professional but had a similar reaction. "Ah, Ms. Watson. You and your son have a special table." Special table. An ironic expression. It was a small table in the corner of the room, near the service door. Far removed from the main guest tables, as if deliberately hidden. "This is our table," Carol confirmed. "Yes, at the bride's request." Carol suppressed her anger and led Jason to the table. When they reached it, another shock awaited. Instead of regular name cards, special price tags were placed at their seats. Carol's seat had used $1,000, and Jason's seat had defective $500. For a moment, she couldn't believe her eyes. Was this a bad joke? She looked around, but no one was paying attention to them. Guests were chatting happily and drinking champagne. "Mom, what's this?" Jason picked up the price tag with confusion. "Am I defective?" Carol's heart froze. She took the price tag from her son and put both of them in her handbag. "No, Jason. This is someone's bad joke," she said with a trembling voice. "You're a perfect child. Don't pay any attention to this." But Jason's expression was already clouded. He understood. Even at 9, he was smart enough to feel the cruelty of being called defective. Carol was shaking with anger. She felt the urge to stand up and leave. But that would mean letting them win. Lizzie and those who mocked them. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I want to go home," Jason said in a small voice. "Just a little longer," Carol held her son's hand. "Let's eat dinner, taste the cake, and then we'll think about it." After dinner, the time for toasts arrived. The bride and groom sat at the central table, and friends and family took turns at the microphone, offering words of congratulation. Her father John talked about business success, and her mother Martha praised Lizzie's perfect choice. Brian's friends shared memories from college days, and the room filled with laughter. No one asked Carol to speak. After dessert was served, Lizzie suddenly stood up and took the microphone. Her cheeks were flushed with alcohol, and her eyes had a strange gleam. "Thank you all for sharing this wonderful day," she said. "But tonight, we have one more special event." The room quieted. Carol felt uneasy. "It's time for our special auction," Lizzie announced, pointing to Carol and Jason's table. "Look! We have special items available." Guests turned around in confusion. Carol sat frozen. "Used item, slightly worn but still usable." Lizzie continued, laughing. "Just $1,000. Light laughter spread through the room. "And a special set. Child with slight defects, but somewhat usable. Half price for the parent-child set, just $750. Anyone want to buy them?" The room was filled with confusion and tension. Some guests were laughing, but many were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Her parents wore troubled expressions but made no move to stop it. Several people at the bride's table, including Brian, were chuckling. Carol felt tears welling in her eyes. She looked at Jason. Her son had his head down, making himself smaller. She could see his little body trembling. Carol tried to stand up. She needed to say something. But her body was shaking, and no voice came out. Her world seemed to be crumbling. Suddenly, from across the room, a man quietly raised his hand. "I'll pay the full amount." It was a strong, dignified voice. As the room fell silent, Richard Martin stood up. The father of the groom walked to the center of the room with a solemn expression. "In fact, I'll pay double." Richard Martin's voice, though quiet, resonated throughout the room. In the complete silence, he slowly began walking toward the center. Lizzie held the microphone with a confused expression. "Richard, this is a joke. Just entertainment." "A joke?" Richard said in a stern tone. "You call words that hurt people a joke?" He walked directly toward Carol and Jason's table. His posture showed determination, and his eyes held anger. But when he stood before Carol and Jason, his expression softened. "May I?" he asked them. Carol, speechless, simply nodded. Richard stood next to Carol and faced the room. When he began speaking, his voice was powerful and filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is my only son's wedding. It should have been a joyous day." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "But what I just witnessed pains my heart." Lizzie tried to intervene, but Brian grabbed her arm, stopping her. His face was pale. "What many of you may not know," Richard continued, "is that I, too, was once a single parent." A wave of surprise spread through the room. "My wife Catherine left us when Brian was 4 years old. She sought a more exciting life and left with another man." Brian's face hardened. This was clearly a family secret he hadn't wanted discussed publicly. "I raised my son alone. He had difficult times. He was diagnosed with a learning disability and struggled in school." Richard gave Jason a gentle look. "He was bullied. And as a father, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces." "Dad, stop," Brian stood up and said. "This is our day." "Yes, it's your day," Richard looked at his son with stern eyes. "That's why I am deeply disappointed that you allowed such a cruel act." He looked at Lizzie. "And you? I welcomed you warmly. I decided that if Brian loved you, I would accept you too. But this I cannot accept." Lizzie's face was now bright red, her expression a mix of anger, shame, and fear. This was a joke. Everyone was laughing. "No one was laughing, Lizzie," a quiet voice said. From Carol's parents' table, John Watson stood up. The usually strict father's face now showed deep shame. This was wrong. Martha Watson also stood up and joined her husband. Tears glistened in her eyes. Richard turned to Carol and Jason again. "I deeply apologize to both of you. You don't deserve such treatment. Especially not from family." He took out his wallet and began writing something. "As promised, I'll pay double," he wrote a check and handed it to Carol. "But this isn't for you or your son. It's for an education fund." Carol looked at the check and gasped. It was for $50,000, marked "Donation for Special Education Support." "Every year, I provide scholarships for children with learning disabilities or special needs," Richard explained. "In honor of the challenges Brian overcame. And today, I make this donation in your son's name as well." Tears welled in Carol's eyes. She couldn't speak. Richard turned to Brian and Lizzie. "I have always supported my family. Brian, I paid for your education, your first apartment, and even this lavish wedding. But from today, my financial support ends. Brian lost color in his face. Dad, you're joking, right? Joking? Richard said coldly. I just said that jokes aren't meant to hurt people. He turned back to Carol and Jason. This has been a difficult night for you both. If you'd like, my driver can take you home. Carol stood up. With trembling hands, she picked up her handbag and took Jason's hand. Thank you, Richard. But we'll go home in our own car. She took a deep breath and looked at Lizzie. For the first time, she saw fear in her sister's eyes. Lizzie, I can't understand what you were thinking. But we are sisters. Someday, if you want to talk, I'll always be there. Carol raised her head and looked around the room. This is still family. Not perfect, not used goods. And Jason is not defective. He is a wonderful, smart, caring boy. She put her arm around her son's shoulders and walked out of the room with dignity. Behind them, she could hear Brian and Lizzie arguing. Reaching the parking lot, Carol finally released the tension and leaned against the car, taking deep breaths. Mom, are you okay? Jason asked worriedly. I'm fine, Jason, she smiled. I'm proud of you. You were very strong today. Uncle Richard was amazing, Jason said. He was on our side. Yes, Carol looked up at the sky. The stars were shining beautifully. Sometimes, we find allies in unexpected places. Mrs. Watson. Turning around, they saw Richard standing in the parking lot. Let me apologize once more, he said, for my son and his fiancée's behavior. You don't need to apologize, Carol replied. Rather, thank you. For standing up for us. I only followed my family values, Richard said. And that means respecting each other. He turned to Jason. You're a remarkable young man. Someday, will you tell me more about your train project? Jason's face lit up. Of course. I have lots of ideas. Richard smiled. I look forward to that. He handed Carol his business card. If you're interested, let's stay in touch. My company is always looking for excellent people. Especially those with compassion for others. Carol accepted the card. Thank you. I'll think about it. They exchanged goodbyes, and Carol got into her car. In the mirror, she could see Richard still standing there, waving to them. She smiled slightly. Tonight had been a terrible experience, but at the same time, she felt something new beginning. She looked at Jason. Her son was gazing at the starry sky outside the window. We'll be okay, she whispered to herself and her son. 1 week later, Carol's smartphone rang. She answered it in the hospital break room. This is Richard Martin. She straightened her back in surprise. If you have time, I'd like to discuss something with you. Could we have coffee together? 2 hours later, Carol sat across from Richard in a small downtown cafe. Having come directly from the hospital, she was still wearing scrubs. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule, Richard said. Thank you, Carol replied. I've wanted to thank you many times since the wedding night. Richard smiled. I only did what was necessary. He took a sip of coffee. Brian and Lizzie canceled their honeymoon. They're currently discussing their financial situation. Are they really? Cut off financially, Richard nodded. I keep my promises. But this isn't just punishment. They need to stand on their own feet. Carol looked out the window. Thinking about her sister still hurt her chest. I haven't heard from Lizzie. She probably needs time, Richard said. After hesitating a bit, he continued, actually, I wanted to meet you about something else. He took out a folder with documents. My company, Martin Properties, is expanding its employee health management division. We have many construction sites and offices, and we need professional medical staff. Carol looked at him in surprise. We're looking for an experienced nurse. A management position. The salary would be more than double what you're earning now. But, why me? Carol asked. You don't know me. Richard smiled kindly. I have an eye for people. And someone with your strength and compassion is valuable. Carol looked through the documents. As he said, the salary was more than double her current one. The working hours were also regular, which would mean more time with Jason. Let me think about it, she said. Of course, Richard nodded. There's no rush. They moved on to other topics. Richard talked about his days as a single father. Carol shared her experiences too. There were surprisingly many similarities. 1 year later, Carol was enjoying fulfilling days as the head of the medical division at Martin Properties. Jason had made friends at his new school and was channeling his passion for trains into his robotics club. Richard regularly had meals with them and listened enthusiastically to Jason's projects. One day, she found an unfamiliar envelope among her mail. Opening it, she discovered it was a letter from Lizzie. Carol, I want to apologize for everything. The letter began. Lizzie and Brian had struggled financially, and she had come to realize how difficult it was to run the family accounting firm alone. It took time for me to understand your strength. Carol finished reading the letter and quietly folded it. She looked out the window. It had been a long journey, but finally, a new beginning was in sight. Her cell phone rang. It was Richard. How about dinner with Jason tonight? I'd love to hear about his robot. Carol smiled. With pleasure.